The textbook example of devolution is going to be the United Kingdom. All right. United Kingdom is all up in the news right now, actually. They have until March something, I think March 20 something, to figure out how they're going to go about the Brexit deal. And so right now you're seeing that all up in the news. I just watched a video a few minutes ago actually about that, about Theresa May's plan for Brexit kind of didn't get passed in Parliament. So nevertheless, talked a little bit about that last week. What we see going on here is the United Kingdom is one state. It is a country in and of itself. Right? When we talk about a state, we're talking about a country. So everything you see in this kind of an orangey color here, that's the United Kingdom. Notice that the Republic of Ireland is not part of the UK. It is its own country. But Northern Ireland is part of the UK. And so all of this, you've got the Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales. They each have their own regional parliament, and they're not totally controlled by a central government necessarily. And there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, well, here's a list of some of the things that they might take care of. All right, so they have their own legislature. Talking about Scotland is going to have their own parliament with their own legislature, their own laws that can be made by their own people. They take care of things like education. The United Kingdom is going to handle big topic things, kind of like diplomacy and defense, for example. I think I'm missing. I feel like there should be another slide in here. Maybe we'll cover it in a second. If not, we'll go back. In 2014, there was a referendum. When we talk about referendum, it's like a vote of the people for Scotland to become its own country. Okay, so if you look at the history of this devolution cycle of the United Kingdom, going back as far back as the 1970s, 1979, you've got what they call a devolution referendum, where they start to kind of relinquish powers from the central government into some of these regional areas within the United Kingdom. A second referendum was held in 1997, where more freedoms perhaps were voted into regional legislatures. And then in 2014, Scotland, and that's what you're looking at here, actually held a referendum to decide if they're going to even remain as part of the United Kingdom. So all this kind of begs the question, who are the Scots compared to the rest of the United Kingdom? Well, I think this here is where, somewhere in here I had, they consider themselves a nation unto themselves. Okay, when you think about people's identity or their nationality, we talked about that a little while ago. They don't identify with the UK as much as they identify with, I'm from Scotland, I'm from England, I'm from Wales. They consider themselves a nation to themselves and a completely different identity from the other parts of the group. So you can imagine that if they differ on certain things, they might want to have laws made by their own people in their own region and have that degree of representation, of government. The 2014 referendum, everyone, by the way, thought that Scotland was going to be an independent country. And it didn't, all right? It didn't. They surprisingly voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. For many, many years, they talked about this. Historically, Scotland was its own kingdom. Sometimes it was a kingdom where the monarch controlled Scotland as well as England, but they were historically their own thing, and so for them not to vote themselves into an independent country is pretty surprising, and it was very, very small. It wasn't overwhelming. All right, so you had about 84.6% of the people turn out for this referendum, and it was about 45 to 55 in terms of how they voted to stay in the United Kingdom. Right, had loads of implications. By the way, when I say that, what I mean is that if Scotland would have become its own country, you would have possibly seen where many other groups in Europe would have perhaps tried to say, hey, we want to be our own country too. We call this separatism. There's a map I'm going to show you a little bit later that's going to kind of spell that out for you and show you where these different separatist movements are. Scotland would have succeeded. Other nations living within sovereign states would have perhaps had the inspiration to do the same thing. Here's another thing, though. This here is a little bit more recent. 2014 isn't that far away, or that far back. But in 2016, that's when the Brexit vote was. was held. Now, here's the thing. If you look at what this map is showing you, if you lived in Scotland, you pretty much believed that you wanted to stay with the European Union. Okay, now that's really important. So most people in Scotland wanted to stay in the EU. In fact, what was that, 62 to 38%? That's a pretty huge majority wanted to stay part of the EU. If you lived in the southern half of the United Kingdom, in England and Wales, you wanted to be your own country. You did not want to be part of the EU. But that's interesting there, because now that the Scottish held this referendum in 2014 to say, hey, we want to stay in the UK, in some cases reluctantly. Now there's talk about there being perhaps another referendum later on down the road for this, Scotland to revote on whether or not they want to stay part of the UK, because this right here could have possibly been a game changer for many Scots. I mean, it's no way of knowing that, but I mean, if the majority of them want to remain in the EU and they're being pulled with the United Kingdom outside of the EU, that could be a big deal for them. So just something to think about, in the next few years, you might see that.